So I'm going to have to open it, find it, and put it on there.
Yeah. I'm gonna just kind of talk for a minute and tell everybody what's going
Yeah.
on because we're live now. So we are
Okay,
back
good
on.
deal.
We are back
All
on. We're
right.
on a different stream. Woo! So I
Too
guess you
much
guys,
fun.
I guess you guys were all watching as I scrambled around and tried to get this sorted. I am so sorry. My goodness, I know nothing does more damage to audience retention than not having your Wirecast work, right? Ah. Anyway, got Doc Murdoch
All
here.
right.
Hey, man.
Yep. I'm
And
trying to
again,
get logged back in for myself so I can see the chat.
yep. I'm going there myself. Going there myself. No, it's not made for kids. And save. And there we go. I see the chat now. And again, Metro Drones. He is the man. This is super cool. I like this color too. And it's water because I've been in the sun all day. Hey, what's up? I see the grumpy blogger. I see Oz by Drone. Just said whoops.
Oh,
I see Brian
there we
Rich.
go.
I see drone shots. I see Brad. Oh man, thank you guys for coming back over again. Sorry for the yeah, Oz by drone. I know you're probably probably going, Kelly. You got to learn how to do this better. But honestly, I think what it might be. Right before we started, I actually ran over and put this Ethernet cable from my TV into my computer, and I thought that would solve the issue, but it did not help. So I don't know.
Nope.
Anyway,
All right.
Metro
Let's see.
drones. Dang man, new internet fund.
Actually,
That
it'd be to replace the Wirecast.
yeah. I think I might be replacing it with OBS and I don't know, man. It's funny too because so many internet companies only give you the fast download speed, but not the fast upload speed. But I was
Yep.
still getting about 15 upload, which I thought would be plenty on a 3 megabit stream. But
Yeah.
here we are. Chris Haley, for those of you guys that don't know this
Yep.
guy, first of all, he's been to every spin up we've ever had. Second of
Yep.
all, he has helped so many people in this community get started in FPV, learn how to do not Wirecast, Betaflight,
No.
learn how to build drones. I mean, this guy is a pillar of the community and has offered to help me out. As a matter of fact, when we were at Spin Down,
Yep.
brought all his equipment up there and helped us do our live stream from up there. So he's a giver. This guy's a giver. And tonight, what he's here to do is kind of give us some more information about remote ID.
Yep.
There's some fine print in there, right? It's 400 and something pages. Is that right?
470 pages of the original PDF and 100 plus on the published regulation because they published it in 3-column single space print.
Wow. And so that being said, you've read the whole thing. Is that right?
Twice.
Read it all. Wow. Okay. And there are some things in it that are kind of buried that he's surfaced
Yeah.
and is going to share with us tonight. And we're just going to kind of take a look at and discuss about. A lot of it has to do with people thinking that you could fly under 250 grams and be okay.
Nope.
And that may or may not be the case in the future. Also about line of sight. So why don't we just kind of start with why you're doing this and what you hope people will get out of this?
Well, just so everybody understands, I am a Part 61 pilot. I'm building my own full-size 4-seat aircraft, experimental. So I've had to deal with the FAA over these issues. So I needed to know the regulations. So when I got back into flying RC stuff and these new regulations came out, well, the first thing I do is I go pull this out, and I start looking the regulations up. So, and then I start looking the regulations up that they're posting and proposing, and I start comparing things, and that's where we end up. So, I mean, it's a detail thing that you have to do with the FAA. You can't just take what they're putting out at face value. It's never face value. I mean, I've had dealings with the FAA in the past over something super simple that should not have been an issue, and it literally almost made it to where the guy that was giving me my check ride wasn't going to give me my check ride. And it was over my student pilot's license being laminated.
Really? You can't have it laminated?
According to the regulations, you are not to, what's the word it uses?
Alter
You're not to alter a federal document. And by laminating it, technically, I altered it.
Dang. But you ended up getting that check ride, right?
Yes. Yes, I did.
Okay.
But he could have refused and would have been well within his rights to, because of the way the regulation was written.
So I think the point you're trying to make is they really pay attention to the detail and
Yes,
sometimes the letter of the law, not the spirit of the law.
that is correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
And just for everyone who doesn't know about your plane that you're building, can you
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about that? Because you've talked about it at Spin Up and Spin Down a couple
Oh,
times.
yeah.
But yeah, what do you got going?
It's called a Bearhawk. The design is a 4-seat bush plane that was designed by a gentleman by the name of Bob Barrows. He's out on the East Coast. He's an engine builder, and he needed an aircraft that could fly in and out of very short strips on the East Coast during the summertime at almost 100% humidity. So he designed an airplane to do exactly that.
At 100% humidity, but now where you are, it's
Yeah.
0% humidity, right?
Pretty close. But
Wow.
I am also at 6,000 feet elevation.
Yeah, which makes it a little hard. You know, you need a little more oomph to get up in the air, right?
Correct. So being that we have lower density altitude as far as the humidity is concerned, that density altitude comes back up because of my actual elevation. So you need an airplane that can get in and get out with power, and that's the airplane he designed.
Is it able to go on a shorter runway too? Is that part of the
Yes.
power? Okay.
Yes, at I forget what elevation they tested it at. I want to say it was like 2,000 or 3,000 foot elevation, but they tested at full max gross payload at the time was 2,800 pounds, and at 2,800 pounds they could get it off the ground in 400 feet.
Wow.
Turn around and put it right back down on the ground in the same 400 feet.
So we're talking just barely longer than a football field, and basically the same distance you can fly your drone vertically.
That is correct.
Hey, a shout out to Lloyd too. Thank you for the super chat. Just saying hi. And
Absolutely.
thanks for all the support of Judy and I. Yeah, man. I hope she is doing better. I know you're
Yes.
taking good care of her. I also hope that Rick Halber is doing a little better. I know he had been back in and out of the hospital a couple times. So everyone, pray for Rick, pray for Judy, and thank you guys for being here, and thank you for the super chat, Lloyd. Appreciate that. So as far as your take, I know when we first started talking about remote ID, there were a lot of questions. I personally give the FAA some credit for at least opening up a forum where people could comment,
Yep.
right? We had the right to comment, and I think a lot of us did. But now the ruling is in place. And for everyone who doesn't know, can you give us like just a 1 or 2 minute overview of what this ruling's all about, if someone's unfamiliar?
Okay, the original NPRM had the biggest issue with it was the network requirement. And it was going to require virtually everybody to be network connected when they flew. Or you had to fly at their FRIA, which is nothing but, most of them are nothing but dirt lots in the middle of nowhere. And there was no in between. There was no provision for FPV or home built or any of that. It was strictly written as commercial
Yep.
built aircraft, and that was it. And with the regulation that they've come out with, they have made provision for this. But with that provision, they've also adjusted some of the wording and how they applied it, and that's where we're having issue with right now.
Yeah, and that actually is getting back to that thing you were talking about a minute ago, the word of the law, or the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law.
That's correct.
So in your reading of it, you've come up with, I think it's about 12 different points you wanted to bring up tonight.
We'll get to as many of them as we can.
Yeah. So let's dive in. I think you have the ability to share your screen, right?
Okay, so let's do the share screen thing, see if this works real good. Okay.
Hey,
so
Brad, thank you.
There we go. Okay, so we'll start with what they have created. This is the new version of the regulation from the NPRM. It starts out with the standard remote ID. Standard remote ID is basically your baked-in, built-in remote identification into the commercial built aircraft, no matter what it is. Okay, and they defined this as UAS. Okay, unmanned aerial system, and it has to include everything that the aircraft uses to fly with. That includes command and control, your internet connection, your video, whatever it is, it comes with it. That's
Right.
UAS. Okay. Then we have what they have is for the module remote ID. This is what they created for the home builders. And for anybody that's going to build anything, the catch to it is you cannot buy like the Beta FPV package deals, where the goggles, the aircraft, and the controller come as a package deal. That would be considered a UAS and would be required
System,
to remote
not
ID as
not
a
vehicle.
system.
Right.
That is
Okay.
correct.
And that's a very important distinction too between UAS and
Yes.
UAV.
That is correct. The aircraft itself, by itself, is a UAV in the FAA's eyes. But as standard remote ID is concerned, a UAS is the aircraft, the controller, and everything that makes it fly.
Right. Right. And that's
Okay.
something that you study if you do get your Part 107, there's some discussion about the difference between those two. So please continue.
That's correct. All right. Then we've got the FRIAs. This part did not change other than they are now making it available for education systems, businesses that are teaching drones, and also for CBOs. So
Community-based organizations.
That's correct. So they've added that ability for even an individual that wants to set up a drone training business. They would then be eligible to petition the FAA for a FRIA.
But typically a FRIA right now would be an AMA field, right?
Well, everybody assumes that, and pretty muchly, I think that's a reasonable assumption. But with the way they've wrote this part of it now, like here in my area, I have our local college just less than a half a mile from us, and a half a mile on the other side in the town, we have what's called Boston Hill Open Area. And it's about a 2 square mile area of hiking and trails and stuff that the college could go to the city, get permission to use it for drone education, because they're just using the airspace. Once they have that in hand, they can petition the FAA that this area here is their FRIA for the college, and then everybody that wants to use it can, because it is not controlled by a club the way an AMA field is. So that's a really important distinction.
So could that you're saying that if it's considered educational and they wanted to make it a FRIA, they could make it a FRIA?
That is correct.
Okay. But our concern is that there's not going to be enough places. And a FRIA is a place where anyone can fly, right? You don't have to have remote ID, you don't have to have to retrofit the settings.
As far as the FAA is concerned, yes. But the FRIAs, if they're an AMA field, many AMA fields do not allow FPV drones of any type.
Yeah. So, no, I know a lot of fixed wing people don't want them.
That's right. So you have to put that in perspective, that even though it's a FRIA as far as the FAA is concerned, and you are legal to fly any non-remote ID aircraft there, that FRIA may be run by a club, and the club is the one that sets the rules as to who's allowed to fly there, not as opposed to what.
Right. They're usually private clubs you have to join. And question, I just thought of this. What about over water?
It still has to be approved by the FAA.
Okay, so even if, like, for instance, the lake in Dillon, if you wanted to fly over that lake, that would still be not necessarily considered a FRIA.
Nope, that is considered national airspace.
Okay.
Because it is navigable airspace.
But it is still Class G airspace.
That's correct.
Okay, and under the old rules in Class G airspace, you could fly there, no problem. But in the new rules, if it's not a FRIA, you would have to have remote ID.
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to kind of summarize that.
Yep.
By the way, I have a new flight crew member. Matt just joined, and I want to tell I
Welcome,
want to
Matt.
I want to tell everybody real quick. This is a new flight crew shirt, and it actually has the flight crew logo on the back and the Ready Set Drone logo on the front. And I know I've had a lack of larger sizes in the past, and so I've ordered all the way up to 4X. So if you don't have a flight crew shirt yet and you're in the flight crew, I will get you one of these. And if you're someone bigger and you have one that's too small, let me know and I'll send you a new one in the bigger sizes. So it was really hard to find 3X and 4X sizes, but I did, and
Oh
I got a
yeah.
whole bunch of them. So anyway, so we were talking about FRIAs. Moving
Yep.
on, then
All right.
this
So
module that has to go in the bird, or what do you
yep,
got
we're
next?
getting to that. Well, the next thing is what FAA defines as UAS. Now, we already alluded to that a lot, but they actually call it out in the regulation. It's on, for anybody that's watching, if you got the PDF, you can look it up. It's on page 10 of the published regulation, not the one that was released in December, the one that was published on January 15th. So what they define is this way: the definition of unmanned aircraft system. Discussion of the final rule. The FAA proposed that the term unmanned aircraft system means an unmanned aircraft and its associated elements, including communication links and the components that control the unmanned aircraft that are required for the safe and efficient operation of the unmanned aircraft in the airspace of the United States. The FAA adopts the term unmanned aircraft system as proposed. So this is where it's called out in the regulation and defined.
Okay, and
Okay,
and
so the next thing
oh, go
moves
ahead.
on to it moves on to this, because that's an important distinction of one type of aircraft versus another type. On remote identification requirement on 14 CFR 89105, except as otherwise authorized by the administrator or provided in 89120 after September 16th, 2023, no person may operate an unmanned aircraft within the airspace of the United States unless the operation meets the requirements of 89110 or 89115. Those two parts, those two lines of the regulation is standard remote ID and module remote ID. And
Okay,
it's got a period on there, which means nothing that flies outside of a FRIA can fly without remote ID. Period.
and can you explain the difference between standard the two types?
Standard remote ID is for the unmanned aircraft system, which is a DJI Phantom, Mavic, Autel, any of those that comes with the control system. Out of the box, you plug the battery in, you turn it on, it connects, and you go fly. That is
Right,
considered a UAS. That
right.
is standard remote ID. The module remote ID, which is the other line, is for like FPV, home builds, anything like that, where you will need to add a module that sends the appropriate information that remote ID is asking for. And it's an add-on to the aircraft. And
And
that's the two
it would be just
distinctions.
something that would sit in the aircraft. So if you're flying a little 5-inch or something,
Um, let me give you an idea. I'll come back to my camera here real quick. All right, just so you got an idea. This is an important piece here because they make a distinction between what is allowed in national airspace and what isn't. If it's in national airspace, it must be remote ID, whether it's standard or whether it's module. They make no quarter for this. If this is to be flown outside of a FRIA, it's got to carry one of these and a transmitter and another circuit board that has all the information that does the checking to see if this is working correctly and that it's transmitting correctly.
which is impossible,
This,
really.
which for something this size, yeah, this thing here weighs 45 grams. I weighed it before we went on. This GPS module weighs 14 grams by itself, let alone the transmitter and the associated circuitry that it's going to need to interpret all of this. So, by the time you're done, you're adding the same amount of weight as this Beta 75 is,
Right, by
all
itself.
up weight.
Yeah. Yeah.
by itself, and it's
So,
like that makes this impossible.
so you're
And
saying
that
because
applies to everything, including all sub 250, which includes the Mavic Mini.
and that's where I think people are there's a
Yeah.
difference. Well, I say opinion. I mean, you're reading this straight out of the rules, and you're looking at it
Straight
as
out of the rules.
like you said, you're looking at it as an absolute, right?
Hmm.
it's not the spirit of the law, it's the letter of the law, and the
No,
letter of the law does
no,
not have an exception for sub 250,
nope,
is what you're saying
absolutely not.
currently.
Yeah, sub
Even though
250 is required to fly in the FRIA.
and that's for part 107 or hobbyist.
If it's Part 107, it's required to register. And if it's required to register, and that's one of the next slides, you are required to have remote ID.
Right.
That goes into a problem with some of the other YouTubers like Nick Burns, Albert Kim, and the like, that do a tremendous amount of work with these things and reviewing them and all that. They will not be allowed to fly behind their houses even
Do you
legally
think you
because
think
it
indoors? Is there any exception for indoors, or is that?
yes, yeah, they did make a stipulation on that they do not regulate airspace within a building or a confined area.
Okay.
Now they didn't define the confined area real well, but a confined area. So that could include like the way DRL does their racing, where they take a ball stadium and set up their race course within the stadium, and there's nobody in the stadium except those people.
Right.
So
Right.
there's that potential.
Well, and, and
So
and I think you could make an argument that it could contain your yard if you had a fence around your yard. But I mean, I guess
yes and no.
that depends on who's judging it, and probably set
It
some precedent.
depends on which
There's
FAA guy shows up.
there's no precedent set yet, right? So
Not a
for
one.
that, so
Nope.
so do you think that will be something that will change between now and the next 30 months?
Don't know on this one,
The sub 250.
honestly.
because
This one I
because
don't know.
you think about it, you couldn't even fly a little SEMA. You couldn't even fly
Nope.
any. You
Nope.
couldn't. You basically would stop drone clubs in their tracks, right? The drone interest group up in Mesquite, Texas, that Jerry runs,
Unless they have their own FRIA.
unless they have a FRIA,
Because
which
they
I
are
guess
right. Because if they're
educational
a
group.
club, that's right, they can apply for one.
I wonder how hard that's going to be to get.
Yeah, I'll get to that.
Do you know, or do you have some clue?
I have a little clue at the moment because the FAA doesn't have a clue yet.
Yeah.
They haven't even got the documents made yet for it.
I mean, really, if you're talking about, so let's talk about this for a minute. If you're talking about the backyard, let's say that a YouTube channel like mine could be considered an educational institution or an educational endeavor, right? Because it is about educating drone rules, reviews, how to fly, all that sort of thing. Could
See,
I apply for a FRIA?
Yeah, we're at that gray area again because yes, you are giving education, but are you an education institution? And
Flight
that's
crew.
the key thing. It would have to be incorporated in some way as
It is incorporated,
an
actually.
well, I mean, as an education
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So, because there's a difference between a company and an education. So, and that's what you'd have to look into.
Like
And
an educational
again, that's
institution.
another right.
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 Okay.
It's gonna. Yeah, there's just so much gray area in some of this stuff. It's just crazy.
I just
for a
can't
whole
imagine.
week, I had a headache going through this
I
stuff.
can't imagine. I can't imagine for the thing that is most troubling about this, honestly, is for kids who want to learn how to fly. When you put all these barriers in front of them, or someone wants to teach them, all you're doing is just putting us further behind in the world as far as science, technology, engineering, and math goes. Right? I mean, all the stuff we've been pushing for a while.
Yep. I tend to agree, and yet the FAA comes out and says we don't agree, and they actually state it in the preamble of the regulation.
Well,
They
let's keep
just
going.
they just come right out and say it. So Yeah, it's just this is the problem that I had with all of this, trying to figure all this out, is that everything was interconnected, and trying to get it to where you can follow a straight line with it is really difficult.
Well, so
All right,
so so tell me this
let's
though.
let sure.
Did you find things generally that contradicted one another, like that would contradict itself within the program or
Not
within the
many.
document?
I found a few, but not many. What I found was stuff that was, some people have said is, well, that's not what they meant. Well, but that's not what's written. You see, and I have to go by what's written. No different than with my full size aircraft as a Part 61 pilot. I have to go by what's written. I can't go by the spirit of the rule. I have to go by the letter of the rule. Because if you
Until
break the
there's a
rule,
ruling.
correct.
And once there's
Yeah,
a ruling, you set precedent, and that
that's
says,
right.
okay, this guy was the FAA. Somebody called, his neighbor called. He was annoyed that he was
Mm-hmm.
flying his drone in his backyard and without
Yep.
remote ID. And the neighbor
Yep.
called, and he got investigated. And the neighbor said, well, it was a
Yep.
tiny whoop, and that's okay. And then you have precedent, right? And that's where I think things
Correct.
could get better.
And well, yes and no. Yes, it sets precedence, but no, because it hasn't changed the regulation. The regulation is still there.
Okay.
And that's the problem we have with all the FAA as a whole, is that every FSDO is run independently. I mean, they're like their own little agency within the big agency. And
Explain FISDO.
like, it's a Flight Standards District Office, and each one is set up for a region. Like the one for our area is up in Albuquerque. And just as a little thought on that, I have had a call into that FSDO for over 2 weeks waiting for a return phone call from both guys that are supposed to be dealing with all of this, and I still haven't got a call back from them.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you said it
But to,
earlier.
but to give an but to give an explanation, some FSDOs are better than others.
Yeah,
Okay, like the FSDO up in Reno, Nevada, at Reno Stead Airport. Holy smokes, those guys are amazing up there, because they deal with all the experimental racing aircraft, and that's their thing. But yet you come down like into Riverside, California, and the FSDO down in Riverside, you try to get anything through them that's experimental like that, and they just they don't want you doing it.
yeah.
It's just crazy. But that's the way the rules are, written.
Is there
They
almost
can
like a
enforce them.
lack of consistency
Oh
across the
yeah.
different regions? Yeah,
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
like the
So,
fire marshal or something. Like the fire marshal in some towns might be more
yep.
inclined to shut down a place because it's over capacity, whereas in other towns they might say, well, it's okay.
Yeah.
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 Okay.
I mean,
Wow.
it's just crazy. But that's what that has been my personal experience with the FAA. It's that varied.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
but
so
here, let's get on to the next piece here real quick so we don't get
yeah.
too late tonight, because we do
Sure.
got a lot.
Okay.
All right, the next one, let me go back here so you guys can all see it. All right, this one is, and I hope this is coming through right side round to everybody.
Yeah.
So,
Mine's backwards, but yours is right.
yeah. Okay, mine's backwards that I'm looking at from you as well. All right. So, who is required to have remote ID? This is the biggie. Remote ID is tied to registration. And they made a very big point of this in the preamble to make it very, very clear. 14 CFR 89101 on page 437 of the document, it says applicability. It says, except as provided in paragraph B, this subpart applies to the following: persons operating unmanned aircraft registered or required to be registered under Part 47 or Part 48. And what that is referring to is that if you fly as a recreational pilot, you are required to register once, and you place that registration on all your aircraft.
Right.
But if you fly for Part 107, you're required to register every aircraft. And being they are tying remote ID to registration, if you are required to register, you are required to comply with remote ID. Sub
So
250 is not
okay.
required to register. But again, in the first pane that I showed, only remote ID aircraft are allowed in the national airspace, which means sub 250 is FRIA only.
You don't think there's any way they could be excluding it if it doesn't have to be registered? Because currently, you're right, you don't have to register the sub 250. Are
Correct.
they there's nothing in the first part that says registered aircraft. It just says or UAS or UAV. It says
Right. It's
any.
just right. What it's doing is it's defining what it is, but in the regulation where it calls out this, if it's required to be registered, it must have remote ID. But then if you're sub 250 and you're not required to register because that's in the regulation, then it doesn't have to have remote ID. But if it does not have remote ID, it must go to a FRIA. It's not allowed in the national airspace.
Right. And just to go on a side here a little bit, because I think this would be a question I would ask, is what about all these manufacturers? So, you do have Autel, you do have DJI, you do have Parrot, et cetera, who are bigger manufacturers, bigger players. Yeah. You've got even the Skydio, right?
Yes.
They're going to incorporate remote ID. I mean, by default, they're going to have to, right?
They will be required to if they are going to sell their aircraft for flight. And the key point is flight, not sale. But if they're going to sell it, if the aircraft is intended to fly in the United States national airspace, it's going to have to comply.
And technically, how hard do you think that's going to be for them to do? I mean, to ramp that up in 30 months approximately and incorporate that?
Well, actually, they are required to be compliant in 18 months.
That's right. We are compliant to be 30 months. They're 18. Correct. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. 18 from the 60-day buffer that they placed from publication. So from March 16th this year is when the 18-month time clock starts.
Do you think that people will be able to retrofit existing like Mavic 2s or Inspires or things like that?
Boy, I'll tell you, I couldn't even begin to answer that because they're already using their Wi-Fi as part of the command and control connection for a lot of those.
Right.
So how are you going to make it transmit blindly a whole bunch of information continuously without affecting the command and control?
Could you have a piece of hardware that you plugged into your laptop and you basically uploaded the information to it? And
nope.
Is it dynamic information that's changing constantly, or is it just static information? Like your name.
We'll get to that. I've got a pane that describes all that, or most of that, I should say. It gives aircraft ID, it gives altitude, it gives position, both GPS position of both the on standard remote ID of the aircraft and the control station. And then it gives a few other things that it also has to broadcast. Now, the broadcast is in the regulation under it's 47, part 15, and I forget what the extra part is. It describes the FCC's requirement as far as frequency and how often it's going to have to update the information. And the information that they're asking to be updated is to be updated every second. So,
but I mean, drones are already doing that, right? I mean, they're already sending that information out to the pilot. You've got your coordinates, you've got your altitude, you've got all of those things. Is it not possible to have a separate transmission that is truncated and only sends the required information?
Well, I don't know how they would do it exactly. I know how I would think to do it. I would find a way in the software to copy that particular information out and then send it through another small piece of circuitry that would transmit it. But not only does it have to transmit it, it has to error check it, because if it stops transmitting, it tells you it stopped transmitting and you are required to land.
So the moment it stops transmitting,
that's correct.
It's got to validate that it's transmitting itself.
Right. So now it's got to do software to check itself to see if it's sending the information out, and it goes back and forth. I mean, this is no small feat. I mean,
Yeah.
to some people it's simple, but for most, and looking at this from our perspective, this is a big deal, on how they're going to do this and make it small.
Well, if you could get
Because
into,
not only do they got to do it on standard UAS, they got to do it on the module. It has to do the exact same thing,
well, I was going
other
to say,
than the control station location. What that one does is it only transmits the takeoff location.
if you could get
And
into
that's the
building
difference.
that piece of hardware, that would be, and figure out a way to do it. And it's plug
Yes.
and play, right? If it's something you
Yeah.
literally could plug and play into a 5-inch quad, that would be a pretty good business to be in.
It's got to do even better. It's got to plug into a 2-inch quad, because anything that's flown outside of the FRIA has to have it.
Yeah. Well, I was starting bigger and going to work on my way down, but
Yeah. I mean, even this right here, this would require it as well.
hey, is that the
Yes,
one
it
I
is.
sent you? Nice.
This is the
nice.
GFRC.
Yeah.
Yep, she's all ready. She's ready to go.
Nice. Yeah. So that has an HD camera built in too.
Yes.
Yeah. So awesome. Hey, you haven't flown it yet?
Nope, we're going out tomorrow to go fly it, because I had to
Awesome.
order some battery straps for it to fit the batteries.
Cool.
So,
Well,
and-
I'm glad you got it ready to go. You know what happened with that? Just a quick aside. I got that. I flew it 5 or 6 times, pretty gently. I mean, you can see it's in good shape.
Mhm.
Five or 6 times, and then I got my digital system and
Yep.
the rocket, which is basically the same form factor, pretty
Yes.
much the same quad, but with the
Yep.
digital system. And then I was like, oh, I bet Doc would like this one. He's got analog nailed. So
Yeah, oh yeah, everything's analog here.
And
Oh, my
I
goodness.
will
Let's see
say, when you do analog right, and that's something that
Mhm.
I've observed with both Doc, and I saw this with Jerry's setup when I flew with him a little while back. If someone has analog set up properly, you can get it pretty close to a digital feed within a certain range, right? I mean, you can get a
within
pretty clear
reason,
signal.
yes. Oh
But,
yeah,
okay.
within reason.
I digress.
So, That's
Please
okay.
continue.
All right, let's get on to the next one. The next one's going to be another interesting one. So that was who is required. Here's where the issue is with sub 250. Okay, on sub 250, let me go to that page there. Hey, come here, page. That way everybody can see it. All right, on sub 250 UAVs used for Part 107 will have to comply with remote ID, including tiny whoops. This is what I was referring to, that if it's required to be registered, it is required to comply. So no matter what its weight is, it will have to comply. So that's on page 16 of the PDF document, 14 CFR part 4815B. This is where the registration requirement is. And then also in 4815B, it says no person may operate a small unmanned aircraft that is eligible for registration under 49 USC 44101 and through 103 unless one of the following criteria is satisfied. And the criteria that they put out is the owner has registered and marked the aircraft in accordance with the part, or the aircraft weighs 0.55 pounds or less on takeoff, including everything that is on board. And that's a key set of words, because on your Mavic Mini, it's under 250.
Right. But the minute you add a sticker to it or a little thing to it, it's over.
Or the moment you fly it under Part 107, you are required to register it, which means now you have to add the module.
Which is going to put it over the weight anyway.
That is correct. So, and that's where they get it. That's where they get you on it. And then the last part here, let's see here. Yeah, this is the regulation for recreational purposes, is 49 USC 44809A1. So, and that's where it stipulates the aircraft is flown strictly for recreational purposes.
So let me pull out one piece of this that I want to make sure I'm clear about. Because currently, if you're Part 107, you have to register each aircraft. If you're a hobbyist, you just have one number and you put it on. But
that's correct.
Under 250, there's no registration number that you have to put on it. You don't have to have any identifier on it. Where would you even put that sort of? I mean, some of these stickers that I have a little label maker. I mean, they're so tiny that there's literally no room.
Yeah, where do you put it on that?
I mean, it becomes part of the design or something.
Yeah.
That is interesting point. And I don't know if you had heard this or not, but when I went over to Germany in 2019 and I flew with Felix from Quadcopter Guide,
Hmm.
he told me that over there you actually have to have a fireproof sticker on your drone, like
Oh, that's
it's got
interesting.
it's like those things that are etched in metal. They're kind of like you
Yes.
punch in something where it would survive a crash and or a fire and still be
Wow.
identifiable. So that's their law, and you have to have proof of insurance with you. There's some
Yeah.
regulations over there that are stricter than ours, or at least two
Yeah.
years ago they were.
Yeah. At least certain aspects of it. Hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just interesting. I mean, I've looked at it from the standpoint of everybody's kind of got the issue of where do you put this thing. So and I've thought about, well, guy, if you got like one of those little laser engravers, and you buy a whole bunch of stamped little tags that are just X long with a hole in it big enough to put a 3 millimeter screw through it. Well, now you can put your registration number, have it etched on it, and buy a bunch of them for pennies a piece, and put them on all your quads. So that was my thought.
Well, yeah,
And now it's metal. It's not going to break off real easy like if it's plastic or anything, and it's not going to rub off as if it was paper or sticker or something like that.
And there's another business opportunity, in addition to
Yeah.
the you could make these little metal or
Yeah.
tiny little things. You could make them so small that you have to. You remember microfiche?
Yes.
You can make like a little microfiche thing that goes on it.
Well, I do believe somewhere in the regulation that I read, it has to be legible. So
Right.
that means you have to be able to read it with the naked eye. So
Right.
you
Just like
can't
just
get
like
in
you
there with a
can't use
microscope.
you can't use binoculars for line of sight. You can't use a
Correct.
microscope for yeah. All right. Dang,
Yeah.
you're killing all my
I
business
know.
ideas.
I know it was a pretty good one, huh?
Well,
All right, let's
so what else you
get
got?
on to the next piece here. Okay, so the next piece is one of the bigger ones. This one is where the FAA defines home built, and this is where one of the biggest issues is right now. 14 CFR 89.1. It is the very first line in the regulation. It defines home builds as per the verbiage in the regulation may not be able to be used for Part 107 operations. The FAA went out of their absolute flipping way to make it clear that this whole regulation, was performance based the whole time. I mean, they kept reiterating it line after line after line in the preamble. And yet
Yeah.
the very first line of the regulation dictates what a home built is to be used for. And it states the following definitions apply to this part. Declaration of compliance means a record submitted to the FAA by the producer of a standard remote identification unmanned aircraft for remote identification broadcast module to attest that all the requirements of subpart F of this part have met. And the next line in that first regulation says home built unmanned aircraft means an unmanned aircraft that an individual built solely for education and recreation. Solely, I looked the definition up to be absolutely certain I was thinking the right thing. It defines as only
Right.
for education and recreation. So
So
they
this
have dictated exactly what they are saying they want home builts to be used for: education and recreation only.
Yeah, and this is going to
Nope.
kill people like you who
Yeah.
build these things all the time.
Well, no.
Well,
I can build it for recreation.
right. But if you wanted to do something commercial with it, if you wanted to
That's
put a
right.
camera on it, um,
That's
and
right.
and I also wonder at what point is it? So, for example, there's like Shen drones, right? Shen drones. I
Yeah.
don't know how big Shen drones is, or Catalyst
Catalyst.
out of
Yeah.
Houston, right? They're like two or three guys. I think they're a small shop. I
Yeah.
don't know how big they are, but
X Hover's the same way. Rotor Riot, same way. They're all small shops.
yeah. At what point
And
is that considered home built versus okay, we're incorporated, we build drones. There's two of us. Is it
okay, that
past
the
muster?
defining line, well, the defining line again is if what you buy in that box has everything in there to make it fly.
So it's a UAS.
Correct. If all you're buying is the frame, it's a home built.
Wow.
It's just that simple. As long as you're not buying all the components in a kit, because they actually define that as well as a UAS or a fully assembled one, similar to the way the Tiny Hawk 2 Freestyle is in their kit with the goggles and the controller.
Comes with goggles, controller, batteries, the whole thing.
Yeah. That is considered a UAS and would have to comply to standard remote ID.
Okay. Even though it's tiny.
Correct.
And
now, how do they get? Now, how would a company like that get around it? Well, it's real simple. You stop selling it as a complete kit.
Right.
You sell the radio separate, you sell the quad separate, and you sell the goggles separate. No more kits.
Which is a shame, again, when you're getting people into it. I mean, so many of us started with a Tiny Hawk kit or something like that.
Oh, absolutely.
Which, it is.
Yeah, I agree. And they're not the only ones that are going to get hit by that. I mean, Eacheen's going to be in that same boat. Hubsan, all of them.
Yeah.
All of them.
SEMA.
Now, here's an interesting thing about Hubsan and SEMA. They sell very marketable, low-end consumer grade, right? So how would they get around it? Well, you buy the copter separate, and then they give you an option of different type controllers. And you have to buy the controller separate.
But you're still going to have remote ID in it, even if it's just
if it's flown outside of a FRIA.
Right. If it's
but that's how they can get around the production issue of being required to be standard remote ID.
It's like one of these. It's like one of these rules. I don't know if you've ever received something. My mom actually used to do custom T-shirts. Like, she had a business where she made custom T-shirts and stuff years ago, and she also did hats. And they would sell the hats with this little string on it. And I was like, why do they? Because you would just pull the string off. It wasn't. She's like, that's because it's a different regulation if it's not finished. Like if there's these. It's like the pillows with the tag that say cannot be removed and except by consumer. And it's like
it's funny as all get out. But it's that kind of thing. So
all right, keep
go
going
to the next piece. Oh yeah. We're getting there. This is the big one, okay? And this one Vic Moss addressed and basically says, no, he doesn't believe the regulations say this, okay, on Ken's stream last night.
Yep.
But yet everybody else there said, yeah, it does. And here it is. It's FPV operations as per the verbiage and the regulation may be illegal. 14 CFR 89.115 2II, and this was in reference to the email I told you I got from John Cupey.
Right.
He didn't lost his name. He didn't address this particular portion of it. He addressed the front half of it, but not this one. And what this says is under alternative remote ID, which is the module, under II, the person manipulating the flight controls of the unmanned aircraft system must be able to see the unmanned aircraft at all times throughout the operation. Now, this is not new in the sense that the FAA has held that for visual line of sight, but they've always made an exception for a visual observer. In this new regulation, they do not.
So even with a visual observer, you cannot pilot a...
Nope.
Wow. Now that...
Not according to how it's written. Okay. Yeah. And all they would have to do to fix this and fix the other one as well is here it would say, or have a visual observer. And that's all they'd have to add to this line and it would make FPV legal.
Right.
100%. No question. Nobody'd even question it. Because now you got a buddy that's with you flying. He's your visual observer.
Right.
Okay. And it's done.
And even out of FPV, there's so many times. Today, actually, I told you earlier, and I don't know if I mentioned it on this stream, but I got to fly over a wastewater treatment plant in Marble Falls. It was great. I had one of my guys there and there were a lot of power lines and stuff around this thing. So
Yes.
actually, but I had the smart controller, and I'm watching the shot. I'm trying to make sure I'm getting a nice smooth, rotation
Mm-hmm.
around the water tank and stuff. And I've got one of my guys watching the power lines and watching the
Yep.
drone and just giving me a, hey, you're a little close, go up a little, and
That's right.
first of all, it makes total sense to do that, especially when you have clients there and you're doing this for
Yes.
pay. You have to do it, of course. But for
Mm-hmm.
an FPV pilot, it really is nice to have someone with you to be it, because you're so blind. And I'll tell you this: I was flying by myself the other day, flying FPV. I
Mm-hmm.
guess I was breaking the rules because I had my goggles on at Canyon Vista, and I heard footsteps coming up behind me, and my
Yep.
quad's on the other side of the field, and I'm like, so what do I do? Do I either throw the goggles off and risk crashing, or so I ended up bringing it back as fast as I could, and also going, hey, what's up? Turned out to be another pilot who was just
Yeah.
coming out and wanted to say hi. But you never know. You hear those footsteps
That's
behind
right.
you. That's when having that guy with you, your buddy. I like to have
That's
Kai
right.
or Brad because they're both big guys.
Yeah. Yeah, they're bigger than both of us. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, all right. Well,
Hey,
let's
well,
continue.
before we go
Oh,
on, Geeks Mana's in the chat, and he made a comment about David Messina. Dave Messina, he says, I think Dave Messina raised this issue with the FAA today. He has posted an update on Facebook to say clarification is coming. Yes, and that is something Vic Moss and I'm getting his name right. What is his name again? Hold on, Kenji Sugahara had mentioned that they are talking with FAA about this.
okay.
And if they fix this just with the simple, like this one, with the simple addition of or a visual observer, then great.
Yeah, yeah.
But
That
if they
relieves so
don't,
much concern people have,
absolutely. I
especially with so
mean,
many people getting into flying FPV. I mean, it's
yes.
it's it's becoming a better and better and a bigger and bigger and more widely done hobby.
Bruce, and I didn't know this. I hadn't looked this kind of information up, but Bruce said that about 85% of all the pilots that are registered right now with the FAA are flying recreational. This stuff. Only
Right.
15% are flying Part 107 commercial.
Well, I think people get their 107s for different reasons, right?
Yeah,
Even if you're flying recreationally, it's still a great thing to get, just for the
sure.
knowledge of it. But ultimately, I feel like if people are going to fly FPV, they do need
Mm-hmm.
to have some baseline understanding of the rules. Because if you're
Mm-hmm.
flying a 5-inch quad, you could really hurt somebody. If
Oh,
you
absolutely.
weren't doing things the right way, flying over people, flying over cars, all of
Yep.
that kind of stuff is even more dangerous with FPV than it is with a camera drone.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with that. Because with a camera drone, if it has a loss of connection, the first thing it does is it fail safes and goes home.
Yep. Yep.
And as long as you've got your elevation for return to home set correctly, it'll rise up and go home and not get anywhere near anybody.
Well, and
So,
and and, and I know there's more FPV quads coming out with GPS and
yep.
some of these long range ones, but ultimately, again, when you're in there, I mean, you forget sometimes the environment around you versus when you're flying with a controller and looking at your drone. It's just a
That's right.
different experience, and that's the beauty of it, but that's also
That's
the
right.
danger of it if you're not.
That's right.
If you're, that's why I love when I'm flying FPV. I love being in a big open space with nobody around.
Yep. Yeah. And for me out here in the desert, I got lots of that.
Yeah, true, true. All right, let's
So,
keep going.
all right. Next one. Man, a lot of stuff to cover. All
back
right.
back back from the sky says, I can't imagine having a visual observer with a tiny whoop.
Yeah.
You got your buddy sitting there, hold my beer.
Yeah. 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 You better have good eagle eyes too.
Yeah, yeah, they are tiny.
All right. So that pretty well covers the home built side and the issues with home built versus 107 and then FPV. Those are the two big issues that if FAA can change the verbiage just a little bit, will fix all of that. And everybody will be pretty happy about it.
Yeah,
Now comes the challenge. All right. This is where it really gets ugly. And it's not so much ugly for us individually, but ugly for the producers of UAS, for the standard remote ID. They're going to be required and may have to comply with all type certification processes that are required of a Cessna or a Piper. Because in 14 CFR Part 89.110B1, it states, standard remote ID unmanned aircraft requirements. A person may operate a standard remote ID unmanned aircraft only if the unmanned aircraft meets all of the following requirements. Its serial number is listed on an FAA accepted declaration of compliance, or the standard remote identification unmanned aircraft is covered by a design approval or production approval issued under Part 21 of this chapter and meets the requirements of Subpart F. Now, this opens up a couple of issues that they haven't really defined clearly yet as to what's the difference between type certification with an airworthiness certificate and a design approval and a production approval. So again, they don't even have the documentation out for this for anybody to even apply for it yet.
But essentially, boiling that down, what you're saying is it's going to be the same approval that you would have to go through as a manufacturer. So Cessna, they're making
Correct.
a new model. They have to
That's
go through
right.
this approval process, which is a big deal.
It is a very big deal. Yes.
And currently, I have no idea what sort of approval DJI would have to get with the FAA before they release. None currently?
I don't know. Well, none as far as, none at the moment. It just has to meet certain FCC standards.
Right. The radio communications.
Because it uses radio communications, yeah. So at the moment, there is no FAA requirement. This now places one.
You know, the other thing that's kind of weird about all this, and we're talking about sub 250 grams, but also sub 55 pounds, right? That's where it's been for a long time, is a lot of these things when you went over 55 pounds, okay, I could see dropping this down to, all right, anything over 10 pounds has to be certified like this, because again, a 10-pound projectile traveling at 90 miles an hour, or however fast you can fly it is deadly. But a 1 pound or a 500 ounce or an 800 ounce or gram quad.
Yeah.
I mean, I've hit myself. With. Fortunately, it was a ducted quad, but I have hit myself before.
We've seen that on video. Okay?
Yeah. That's what it is. They're looking out for my health.
Here's the catch to it. Okay. The way the weight limit thing is, and that was an interesting thing you brought up, because I distinctly remember back in the 70s when that came out, when the AMA came out with the set of guidelines that denoted all the different parameters. That's been out since somewhere around the 70s. I don't remember the exact year.
The 0.55 or the 55 pounds or?
Yeah, it's the 55-pound weight limit, the 400-foot altitude limit, and the 100-mile-an-hour speed limit. That's been around for a very long time. So, I mean, I remember that as a teenager. So,
well, part of the big change. Really? You're a young-looking guy.
Just a smidge.
Part of the problem that we're up against, honestly, is the barrier to entry to fly a model aircraft in the 70s or the 80s was a lot higher. You had to build it. You had to, and there was a lot more involved. Today, you can go to Best Buy or you can go on Amazon and order one and be in the air very quickly. And so that's, I think, what they're trying to correct for, but overcorrecting for in a lot of ways.
I think that could be part of it. But just the way I've read through all these regulations, I don't think so. I think there's a bigger ulterior motive to this, and it's not that.
Well, yeah, you want to get to that then, or is that?
Well, we're getting there.
I know where you're going.
Yeah. So this is the part where it talks about the different design parameters, where it's going to make the manufacturers have to comply to CFR Part 21 and more, which is the interesting part. One thing, and this is just an aside to all of this, when Part 107 was introduced 4 years ago, almost 5 years ago now, the FAA had to go back and make amendments to Part 21 and a number of other sections to accommodate Part 107, so that what you were doing in Part 107 was not required to comply with type certification in Part 21. And it's in 21.1A. It says applicability and definitions. It says, except for aircraft subject to the provisions of Part 107 of this chapter, this part prescribes. So they made an exception within Part 21 for Part 107. They had to go in and amend it. Now, I don't remember if it was in there when they first implemented 107 or whether they amended it later.
Right.
I do distinctly remember when FAA came out with Part 103, which is ultralights.
Which predated 107.
Well, no. Part 103 is for ultralight aircraft.
I'm thinking of 333.
No. This is Part 103.
Gotcha.
Back in the 80s, there was a huge surgence of ultralight aircraft. And the FAA was not set up for that.
Yeah, just like now.
That's right. The AOPA was a big advocate for Part 103 because they had this huge slog of pilots and aircraft that the FAA was trying to regulate like a Cessna, and they're not.
Right.
Not even close.
Right.
When 103 first went into effect, there were issues right out of the gate. I remember that. I mean, it was all over the magazines and it was all over the news for a while. It took, and I want to say overall, I think it took about 10 years for it to settle down, for it all to work out. But, and the big but to this is that the Part 103 flyers had one very large advocate for them in the AOPA. And they got a huge following and a lot of money to be able to lobby Congress and the FAA to make this right. We are lacking that one issue.
Yeah.
In this entire industry, we are lacking that.
Yeah, you wonder if say, for example, the partnership that DRL has with Lockheed Martin or with the Air Force, if one of those organizations would be able to step in and I mean, you would think actually, in a lot of ways, Air Force would love the renewed interest in aviation, and
absolutely
Lockheed would as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So just that's a little tidbit about that of where I think Part 89 could eventually get to, but at the moment it's not there. So I think we're at that first stage of the way Part 103 went, where the FAA overreacted and they had to go back in and fix things. So
and the document can be amended, right? The regs can be amended. That's a common thing, right? Okay.
Yes, that is a very common thing. They will go back in. They will put out an advisory circular stating that they are amending this particular line in a regulation to say this now instead of this, and that's done very regularly. In manned aviation. I mean, you think the books with the regular regulations is big. Wait till you go see the advisory circulars.
Well,
it's crazy.
And ultimately, it's because it's an evolving thing, right? Aviation is always changing. Technology is changing. So that makes sense.
That's right. All right, next thing. This is where I was talking about that there may be 3 ways to do standard remote ID. Okay? And in the 3 ways to do standard remote ID, to be allowed to fly in the national airspace, as previously discussed, and this is quoted out of the preamble in the regulation. It says, as previously discussed, the agency revised subpart F of Part 89 of this rule to clarify which design and production requirements apply to unmanned aircraft under a design approval or production approval issued under Part 21. The revisions also clarify that the requirements in 89.525 through 89.545 for labeling and for the process related to the submission, acceptance, rescission, reconsideration, and record retention of declarations of compliance only apply to unmanned aircraft produced without a design approval or production approval issued under Part 21 and for remote identification broadcast modules. Unmanned aircraft undergoing certification under Part 21 must meet the certification processes and requirements of Part 21 and the requirements in 89.510. That's long-winded to say that they're basically saying there's 3 levels of this certification of UAS, standard remote ID. And what I'm thinking they're intending this for, in the way they've written this, is that the certification under Part 21, the type certification, there is an area where they have special airworthiness certificates that it specifically calls out for aircraft that do not meet standard aircraft design. So, and UAS, drones, stuff that we fly is stuff that wasn't even thought of
Right.
20 years ago.
Non-standard.
So, exactly. So they made a provision within the regulation to be able to give an airworthiness certificate and a type certification to a non-standard flying aircraft based on its unique flight capabilities or flight characteristics.
And you're saying there's 3 levels.
Well, there's 3 levels. It appears to be 3 levels of standard remote ID, which is the type certification, which is the big one, where you got to go through everything.
Cessna.
Then there's you're right, Cessna style. Then there's the design certification and the production certification. So it sounds like they're trying to make 3 different ways of doing it. But also it sounds like they really would prefer everybody that does standard remote ID to do the type certification and be done with it.
Right.
Because they're already, because FAA is familiar with how to do that.
Yeah.
They've been doing that for forever. The interesting part about this also is what it says is, let me go back to that. It says the FAA will publish the list of FAA accepted declarations of compliance at their website. The FAA will publish the list of FAA accepted declarations. Oh, wait a minute. The FAA is establishing an advisory circular. That's that AC I was telling you about.
Right.
On the declaration of compliance process for remote identification and unmanned aircraft. That means they don't even have an idea how they're going to do this yet. That is exactly what they just said there in the regulation.
Yeah, they're bringing it. They're figuring it out.
So they're literally doing this on the fly. So let's see. Ray Kelly now. If Kelly raised a drone and would only come. This meetup would be yeah. Well, there's Ray. There's a problem that we had with wire crash, so that's why we're having to do it this way.
And actually, I do want to say real quick about that. So I've heard about this. I don't know many details, but it sounds like Ray Kelly is hosting a meetup in Florida, right, in March.
Oh, maybe that's what he's referring to.
Yeah. No, I think that's what he's referring to. Is he's hosting a meetup in March. In Florida, March 20th, I think I've seen in the chat.
I am crossing my fingers right now and working things out right now to hopefully be able to go. So
would you drive or fly?
Oh, I'll drive. Yeah, I'll drive because I'm going to have too much stuff to take.
Yeah.
Just like always.
I know you've driven down to Texas a couple times, and I drove up to Colorado.
Oh, yeah.
Man, March 20th. So I wonder if that's around spring break for me. Anyway, Ray, I will be glad to help promote that as much as I can. And so yeah, let's continue. But yes, it's an event. It's a meetup.
Yes.
And I think you can go to Ray Kelly's Facebook page. I think he's got it on his Facebook page. Ray, if you want to put a link in there or something for it, please do.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, let's see here. We've got, so that's the issue with the declaration thing here. They haven't even got the document made yet to do this. This advisory circular provides guidance on declaration of compliance process described in Part 89, outlines the required information for submitting a declaration of compliance. This guidance material is also available in the docket for this rulemaking, except that it's nowhere in there that I could find. Oh, let's see here. Okay, I need to go. Great show. Lloyd, you go take care of Mama.
Yes,
have a good night out there.
Bless you, Lloyd, and Judy too. And thanks for joining us for a bit tonight. Good to see you, man.
You bet. All right, next one. How long to get approved? This is another issue. Remember, the regulation begins. Oops, there we go. The regulation begins 60 days after publication, that's when this regulation becomes live. That's also when the 18-month window begins.
Right. The clock starts ticking, which I guess it
that
already
is when
is.
the clock is already ticking in that regard. So once this regulation goes 100% live here in March 16th, then from that date, it's 18 months. And all of this must be done. They must submit all their designs. They must all be approved. And the production process has to be approved and done, because at the end of 18 months, they will not be able to sell their aircraft and be used in the airspace
Without these things being met.
Without this. Yeah.
So is there any provision for grandfather clause?
No. The only thing that's provision for that is the module. So any of your Phantoms,
put the module in it.
Yep. Any of your Phantoms, Mavics, Autels, anything that was produced prior to this regulation, you can just slap a module on it and it now complies.
Yeah. Made by DocMurdoc Industries.
Oh, no. That's that electronic side of it. That's a little dicey for me. I mean, I can solder it up, but
hey, I want to ask a quick question that Dustin asked a minute ago. He said he took flight training and realized that airplanes are in knots, right? Just like boats, I suppose. How come we talk about miles per hour with drones?
Well, it's some, actually. The aircraft that I got my certificate in, the airspeed indicator was in miles per hour.
Really? Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so it's not all.
Knots is a like maybe a retro thing or a thing.
Knots is it comes from nautical. It comes from the ocean.
Right.
It's a nautical term.
Right. So, ships travel in knots.
Correct. And also the distance is measured in nautical miles. So that's how they get that.
Okay.
So aircraft just back. God, I'd have to go look it up now. I've forgotten where it started. But there is an area where they started doing it knots, but there was also a lot of aircraft that you could choose to have your airspeed indicator miles per hour. So, but yeah, The airplane that I actually got my certificate in was in miles per hour.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's and just for, I don't even know, I believe that a knot is like 1 knot is faster than 1 mile per hour, right?
Yeah.
It's like 1.2 or
very
something.
Small. Yeah, it's a very small amount. So
okay, it's like meters and yards.
I want to say like off the top of my head, I want to say 100 knots is like 105, 108 miles an hour, something like that. I got to go look it up. But yeah, it's just slightly different.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's just one of those little tidbits of aviation.
Well, there you go, Dustin. You asked, and by the way, let's keep going, Doc, because I would love to take a few calls if we can here.
I'd love to do that. Yeah. Here's the other part on this too, is the failure to comply after approval. And this is an interesting little part to this regulation. Failure to comply with any of these requirements is grounds for rescission of the FAA's acceptance of the Declaration of Compliance, which directly impacts where the unmanned aircraft can be operated. An unmanned aircraft listed under a Declaration of Compliance that has been rescinded is only able to operate at an FAA recognized identification area, which means if their Declaration of Compliance gets rescinded, you can't just slap a module on it. It's not allowed.
So meaning that this is for the aircraft, not the pilot.
That's correct.
Talking about
this
here.
is for the aircraft.
Wow. So
let's say if you got a Phantom 4, and for whatever reason DJI loses their Declaration of Compliance with the FAA for that aircraft is no longer legal to fly in national airspace, and it's only legal to fly in a FRIA. And you can't take a module and slap it on it and make it legal because it specifically says so.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of people are probably worried about what's going to happen to, this fleet of drones that I've accumulated all this time, as are you, right? Or even built.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so, all right, well, let's keep going.
Yeah. So there's that part. All right. Next one. All standard remote ID. Let me get to the page there. Hello. Come on there. All standard remote ID compliant aircraft may be required. Oh, this is the biggie. May be required to comply with all type certificated aircraft maintenance requirements, including who may perform said maintenance. This is huge.
So even changing out a propeller or changing out a motor or something could become
It's illegal for you to do it unless you are certified to do it.
Yeah,
that's all under CFR Part 43 and CFR Part 91. That's where all of that is stipulated. I mean, it's huge in there. I couldn't write the whole thing because it's too big. But 91403 in general says the owner or operator of an aircraft is primarily responsible for maintaining that aircraft in airworthy condition. Now, that's responsibility, not actual doing it. Okay? He's responsible.
Right. You could pay someone to do it.
Correct. Including compliance with Part 39 of this chapter. B, no person may perform maintenance, preventative maintenance, or alterations on an aircraft other than as prescribed in this subpart and other applicable regulations, including Part 43. Part 43.3, persons authorized to perform maintenance, preventative maintenance, and rebuilding and alterations, except as provided in this section, and 43.17, no person may maintain, rebuild, alter, or perform preventative maintenance on an aircraft, airframe, aircraft engine, propeller, appliance, or component part to which this part applies. Those items, the performance of which is major alteration, a major repair, or preventative maintenance are listed in Appendix A. The holder of a mechanic's certificate may perform maintenance, preventative maintenance, and alterations as provided in Part 65 of this chapter.
So you're gonna change all our props for us, Doc.
Well, man, I tell you what, I don't even have that certificate.
Oh, you don't?
So,
okay, I just assumed.
No. Building my own aircraft, once it's completed, and I'm issued an airworthiness certificate by the DAR, yeah.
You mean you can't repair it yourself?
No, hold on. In an experimental aircraft, when you build it, when the DAR comes out, inspects your aircraft, and issues your airworthiness certificate and the set of parameters that you need to comply with, because you have to fly off a certain amount of hours, okay, for an experimental. He also issues you, so long as you've complied with all of the appropriate subparts, the oh goodness, I had it on the tip of my tongue now.
Oh, like a right to fix it.
Yeah, he issues you a certificate.
Like a maintenance.
I had it on the tip of my tongue. It's for repair. In other words, you are the manufacturer, so you are issued the right to fix that aircraft completely. You don't have to pay anybody to fix that aircraft, but you can't go and fix your neighbors. You can only do yours,
right?
Because you're issued that certificate.
And theoretically, if you built it, you can do it.
You should know how to fix it. Yeah,
you would hope. You would hope.
But in Appendix A here, they specifically stipulate what it is in that list that you can't touch, and you have to have somebody that's certified to repair. And the propellers and motors and electronics are all included in it.
Wow. And that's so common, especially propellers, but even changing out motors, that's something a lot of people do these days.
Oh, absolutely.
Themselves.
All right, next one. Because of that side of it, if they require the maintenance to follow those subparts, it also comes down to this now. And this is actually not a bad thing to do for 107 pilots in particular.
Keeping a log.
But UAV pilots may be required to keep all appropriate logbooks of a type certificated UAS aircraft licensed under the regulations pertaining to a standard remote ID. and that's in 14 CFR 89110B1. B, standard remote ID unmanned aircraft requirements. A person may operate a standard remote ID unmanned aircraft only if the unmanned aircraft meets all of the following requirements. Number one, its serial number is listed and goes through the list again of complying with Part 21. In 14 CFR 61.51, as required by a representative of the FAA, this is where the FAA has come out and said, if a representative or law enforcement comes out and asks for documentation, you have to provide it. This is the documentation that they are talking about.
And that's something
as
that's
well as
already,
your pilot certificate.
That's already something that people are, I mean, that's advocated for, right? I mean, that's something when you take the Part 107 course, keeping a log is a good idea, whether it's a digital one.
But
the
the FAA
apps.
goes one step further. They are requiring you to keep the same logbooks as a type certificated aircraft, which means you have to keep an airframe log, an engine log, a propeller log, and an avionics log. So, yeah, it gets much more complicated.
Yeah. That I mean, I know right now it's pretty open as to what you can put in that log. It's pretty loose, right? It's basically, yes, I checked everything, and it's all good. But it's just showing that you took the time to do it. Because if you do have an accident, you can show it. It's so much better than if you were like, nah, I don't know, I think I had a cracked propeller or something. Yeah. So.
That's right. And bear in mind, if you've ever had to go before a judge for any reason, the one thing that the judge is going to ask for is, where's your proof? Yeah. And all they want to see is it in writing.
Yeah.
So if you've written down what you did, when you did it, and down the line, he's going to turn to the FAA guy and goes, where's your proof? And they're going to go, well, so-and-so called in and so-and-so said this and so-and-so. The judge is just going to look at it. Look, the dude's got proof. This is his proof.
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Yeah.
So, and that's something to keep in mind. But it's also expanded to the point that if they make the UAS have to comply with type certification, it includes having to keep logbooks on the engines, the props, the airframe, everything. So it gets very involved.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you said it would be a certified aircraft, right? The same amount of
Correct.
stuff. And I guess, perhaps you are flying a certified aircraft at this point, if the other regulations come into play. So
at that point, if they make you have to if they make those aircraft type certified, they will be issued a special airworthiness certificate. And it's type certification. It has to comply with Part 21, Part 40.
This just all gets really, really complicated for recreational flyers, and even a guy like me who went out today. Like I said, water treatment plant in Marble Falls, Texas. Right? There's nobody around. There's nobody around this thing except my client and myself, and we're getting shots of it. But to have to go through all these hoops to be able to take pictures of it from the air is kind of ridiculous.
All right. Yeah, because you would have to, like for what you did, your personal flight logbook, you'd have to log what time you took off, where you took off from, what the flight was, what it was about, and where you landed. That's basically the information you need to put in the logbook, and how long the flight was.
Right. It's all simple stuff.
Correct. In the aircraft logbook, it would be the exact same stuff. You have to duplicate it again in that aircraft. And then if there's, let's say for argument's sake, you have the right to change your own propellers, right? Let's say you land and notice that something hit one of the props and it was chipped. So you wanted to change the prop out. You would have to get the propeller logbook out, make a note of time, date, which engine, which number motor it was,
right?
Which direction the prop spun, because that's important.
Yep.
Why you replaced it and what you replaced it with.
Yeah.
And then date it. And you would have to keep a log of that, of every single thing you did to it.
And remember, if it's a Mavic Air 2, don't use master air screws because it's shaky. or so I've seen. Yeah.
I've heard issues with this. Yes.
Well,
So
yeah. I mean, the big thing I'm hoping for here, Chris, ultimately is that they're gonna do what they did before, and they're gonna write all this stuff. They're gonna come up with all this stuff, and then they're gonna come to their senses in the next 2 years and say, wait a minute, this is complicated. But I know you're getting to the part about the
oh
companies
yeah.
that want the
Oops.
airspace. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, the next biggest issue was the network connectivity. Now that was the big plus that they came out with, says we're not going to do that. We're just going to do broadcast.
Right.
So you guys can all settle down and everybody take a chill pill, right?
And I think a lot of
Yeah.
people, I think that did placate. It was kind of the big flashing light that everybody was afraid of. Because how in the world are we going to have, what if you're flying in Alaska?
Yes.
Jake Sloan, he's up there flying in Alaska, out in
Kelly,
the,
I don't even
yeah,
have to go that far. I go 1 mile away from my house and I've got no cell service.
yeah, very true, very true. But
I mean,
they,
it
so
completely does it, you know?
so that was taken away, or that was removed, right? That requirement.
Yep.
But there's all
Yep.
these other ones.
Well, no, there's a big but to that. And that but is on page 60 of the document. Though the FAA recognizes, and this is all in quotes, okay? I copied this verbatim out of the document. Though the FAA recognizes that there are potential benefits associated with establishing a network of remote ID USS, the FAA believes that for the time being, and given the types of unmanned aircraft operations that are currently allowed, the broadcast remote ID solution fulfills agency and law enforcement needs to maintain the safety and security of the airspace of the United States.
So in other
The
words, it's
key word in
temporary,
there,
time
it
being.
is temporary
Yeah.
for the time being. That means this is coming back. And that's when I step back and go, okay, hold it. All of this stuff that I've found in here because of this was by no accident. They've written this stuff this way on purpose. It's to placate us enough to quiet us down long enough that they can get everything set, because a number of companies came out and says, hey, FAA, we ain't ready for this. This is way more involved than we're set up for yet. So it's just a matter of time when the big companies that are ready to do it nationwide, FAA will implement it. And
So
then by
you
then,
think this is a play for the airspace?
oh, absolutely. 100% absolutely. This is a time saver for them right now. This is a stopgap. And it's a stopgap in such a way to make us be quiet.
Well, there you go.
I don't see it any other way. Because why would you put that for the time being unless you intend to bring back what you put out on the NPRM originally last year, which is what they do. And that's what they're going to do. But by making us comply with this right now, gets us used to having to comply, having to register, having to do it this way, having the information
Incremental steps.
broadcast. It's incremental steps. And then when they do bring the network connectivity out, then it's just a matter of they will go in and add another piece of the regulation that stipulates, okay, well, these aircraft are okay for this amount of time, and then after that, you must comply with network. And then it's done. And at that point, all of this, any of these, will not be allowed to fly at that point. Because that's the way the original NPRM was written. This was outlawed to a FRIA only.
So do you think this has to do with the ability of delivery? Basically drone delivery, drone commerce stuff.
I think on Ken's live stream, I think Bruce made the best description of it. It's about who owns the right to the airspace and how they lease it back to us. Because once they take our freedom to fly in this low airspace, then the only way you can fly in the low airspace is if you pay to play. And that's the network connectivity.
Right.
And that's where all the big money is.
Right.
And
Right.
that's
So
it. I mean, that's what I see in the end. You
so you're
know,
paying $5 a month or $10 a month or whatever for that, and you can't even get it
or
everywhere.
more.
Yeah.
No, yeah, or more.
Well,
All right. So
I
here
hope
comes the
I
last
hope
part
that's
here.
wrong.
We all do, but it's. I'm being quite honest with you. It's not been my experience that this kind of stuff is wrong when you start looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah. If you
So,
smell smoke, right?
yep. All right, here's the next piece here. When does all this take effect? And a lot of people have asked about this. The publication date in the Federal Register was January 15th, 2021 this year. Okay? So, the very first part that takes effect is the 60 days. Okay? There's a little grace period in there. Assuming that this is that 60-day grace period when the FAA throws this out, finds out, holy smokes, we did oops something in there. Okay? So they've got time between the publication and the actual implementation of the rule going live. They got a little bit of time in here to make some fixes. And as Geeks Fauna mentioned, that Vic Moss and Kenji, they are meeting with the FAA, I think Monday, about a lot of this, if not today. So about a lot of this. And I can only hope that they address it the way I'm looking at it and going, certain things just need a subtle change of
Yeah.
verbiage.
Visual
And it's
observer.
fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's fixed. But other things, I don't think they're going to change. At very worst, they won't change it at all. At best, they'll at least define it more clearly
Right.
as to type certification, and this, and this is exactly what it means, and this is what's going to be required, and.
Well, and I
So,
want to go back to one thing that you said earlier, and then I want to see if we can take a few calls, if you're all right with that.
yeah, you
Um,
bet,
and
absolutely.
the thing you said earlier, and it had to do with the repair, with the mechanic
Yes,
certificate. That started with may be prohibited, right? It didn't say
that
clearly.
is correct.
Okay, so
That's right.
that's not clearly set in stone. By the way, I'm just going to plug in my phone real quick because it is
Yep.
almost dead.
No,
But
almost dying.
maybe those are the kind of things that I'd almost rather hear it is required than this ambiguity. The ambiguity is
That's
what is
right.
scary at times.
That is correct. I mean, the way they've written this, it is very unclear precisely what they are asking of standard remote ID requirements for the manufacturer to comply to. And again, they even stated they don't even have the document out that anybody can apply with yet. They're
Right,
still
right,
writing the paper.
right, right.
So we're waiting to find out. And the date's coming
Yeah,
when they're going to want to do this. So yeah, it's kind of one of those things where they weren't ready for this. They should never have let this out yet. They should have had this all worked out. They should have put this out, through a number of channels and says, please read this, give us your opinion, tell us what you think. Is there a problem in there? Is there verbiage issues? Blah, blah, the whole
right,
thing.
right,
And just
right.
fact checked it first,
And 60 days is not a lot of time, right? I mean
No.
you're probably one of a very small number of people who have not only read
Yeah.
it once but read it twice. That's the
Yeah.
part that and I think a lot of
The
people.
worst case is the second time I read it, I actually had it open in two panes because I was comparing it to the document that was released in December and the one that was published in January.
So
So I was having to read both of them.
technically you read it 3 times then.
Yeah, I had to actually because I'd heard that they had left out pages.
Yeah.
Okay, and I wanted to verify that, so I had both of them open, and I went through and just almost line by line and just made sure everything that was supposed to be in there was still in there, and it was. It was just how it was published made the page number way different than the
Right,
original
right.
page number.
It didn't line up exactly.
No,
Well,
not even close.
I opened the line, and again, this what we ended up using. We started with Wire Crash, and it did its thing. It crashed, and then we moved over. And by the way, I think I was on the air during my whole scramble. I didn't lose it. I didn't start cussing. I kept my cool.
No,
Right.
Kelly did really good. Yeah.
We were back on the air in about 10 minutes. But all of that said, we do have this ability to take calls. It's kind of old fashioned, like a radio
Yep.
show. So if you want to call and ask a question of Doc, now I know last time there was a problem where I think we took a call with Nick Burns, and I don't know if Nick could hear the caller. So we're going to see if
Right.
that's a problem this time. But
Let's see what happens.
hopefully it's not.
All right.
I
Let's
I
see
was
here.
also going to ask you. Oh gosh, there was something else about 107 and the mechanics. That is the part really that is blowing my mind the most.
Yes.
Is that
Because that
stipulation that
that hinges on whether they require standard remote ID aircraft to be type certificated, and that's the
right?
key part. If they do, then it must comply with all the other parts, which include maintenance and logbooks and everything.
I know what I was going to ask you. Have you heard this rumor that DJI might be making a car?
I've heard it. Yeah, we'll see.
Any curious if anybody's got thoughts? Hey, Ben T.
Ben T's
Cynic and
in.
me says we should be an investigation of how many FAA and DOT people own stock in the companies. Oh, that's an interesting point there.
Well, here, I'll throw you a tidbit one that even Bruce called Kenji out on. Before this regulation was even published, Kenji already had a patent on remote ID. How is that possible? Nobody else has the information on how to even apply for this thing. And
Yeah.
Bruce called him out and says, are you going to make it available to everybody for free? Why not? If
What
you
was the
already know
answer?
how to do it. Kenji backpedaled and didn't say a word about it. Says he hasn't decided yet.
Wow.
And that's a shame. I mean, if he's truly part of the community for something like this, yeah, I understand wanting to get a patent on certain things and make a reasonable amount of money, but this is a big deal.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, the more people that can actually provide this to people, the better it's going to be. This is where competition is really, really healthy.
More than just competition. It's competition in the sense of design.
Yeah.
You make it available to everybody and say, go for it, guys. Let's make this thing as small as absolutely physically possible.
Right. If you're going to put it on a tiny whoop, then it's going to have to be tiny. I mean, by very definition.
Very tiny. Yeah.
The
smallest GPS module that I have found so far is 10 millimeters square. I do not know how good it performs at all, but that's the smallest receiving antenna that I've found is 10 millimeters square.
Are there 10 millimeters in a centimeter? Right, so it'd be 1 square centimeter.
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we don't have any callers. Come on, somebody give us a call. We want to chat.
Michael Wright mentioned, at this time. Yeah, absolutely. That was in one of the very first pains that I brought up.
Yeah.
About the network stuff. They will bring it back. There is no doubt in my mind.
Joe was talking about giving up frisbees and kites too. At what point do we have to and balloons? No more balloons at birthday parties, right? Outlaw helium. Although I understand helium's actually a pretty rare element, and so maybe
it takes a lot of refining,
to get it out. Yeah. Yep. Well, if nobody's going to call, Doc,
I think I answered all their questions. I mean,
you did.
I think I did. So, and mind everybody, listen, everybody that's watching this tonight, I made a big point about quoting the physical regulation. This isn't my opinion, okay? This is what the FAA has written document-wise and has published. You can go read it for yourself. If any of you guys want the pages that I have, that I've created, just contact me on Instagram if you're on Instagram and DM me and I'll email it to you and you can go look it up yourself. I have no problem with that. This isn't something I did to hide or to hold, that I'm it. No, this was to inform everybody that this is what they have written. This is how it is written, and this is what they are trying to do. Now, in my opinion, this is a stopgap. They did this to patronize us for a time until they can get the network system in place, make it up and running, because at that point, it connects to UTM, and then nothing that flies, nothing that leaves the ground, the FAA will not know about. And that's it.
And I want to also just jump in and say one thing. First of all, I want to say thank you, because the way you explain things, I've known this for a while. You explain things very well. And we do have a caller. I'll grab it in just a second. But
Oh, cool.
but I also want to say that, as we talked about, this is an evolving situation, right? So
Yes.
while there are some uncertainties there, I do think that being informed is the best thing we can do,
Yes,
and that ultimately,
absolutely.
if we can at least know what's going on, not hide our heads in the sand,
Yep.
it's going to be better for everybody. So for you to give us this explanation tonight, I learned more tonight about this than I had in the weeks prior. Well, and from reading what you sent me. Let's see who we've got on the phone here. So when I answer, be sure to mute your live
stream.
Yeah. Hello, who do we have on the phone?
Hey, Kelly and Chris. Hey. This is Chris from Sunrise Water Media. I just wanted to.
Chris.
I recognize your voice.
Hey, I just wanted to give you guys a call. I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say thanks to you and Chris for doing this stream and educating us all, and hopefully getting some impetus going so that we can have some real change happening.
Awesome.
Yeah, it is a big deal, Chris. Yeah,
and I don't think I can hear DocMurdoc. So.
You can't hear me?
All right. Well, I'm going to hang up then, so you can hear him back on the stream.
I can hear him, but last time Nick couldn't hear him, but you could hear him talk. So that's great. I love it. But yeah, Chris and I have talked quite a bit. We've been working on his quads and everything and getting them up and running. And in the process of talking all about this stuff and getting ready for this, Chris had asked me, do you have all that backed up somewhere? And I had to stop and think, no, I don't. I only got it in the one computer. And he says, you need to put that somewhere. And I says, hold on, I'll fix that right now. And I copied everything that I had already figured out, and I sent it to Sunrise Water. I sent it to Chris, to his email. That way I've got it somewhere else. That way, if something did happen to the computer, I could always say, okay, Chris, email it back to me. That way I can get back to it.
If you get abducted by aliens out there in the desert, then
they're going to get through the wife first. That's one of those things. Yeah, well, she's a better handgun shooter than I am. So.
And those aliens, they're not very fast, so they're pretty easy targets.
Yep, that they are.
All right, man. Well, guys,
anybody else?
Yeah, I'm not seeing anybody, but
okay. All right. Well, I am, in some ways, I'm actually kind of glad that we don't have any calls, because that means that what I presented and how I presented it, everybody understood, and that there was no question about what I presented. And I'm actually kind of happy about that, because I literally spent 2 weeks going over this and going over it and going over it and making sure that what I was reading was what I was reading. And it is. It's verbatim. Those are the regulations that they have put out at this time.
And also, guys, there's a lot to this. And so I think that having someone who has read it all is great to have on here. But there's really, I think different people are going to be impacted by different parts of this, right?
Yes, that is absolutely correct.
Certain things that get me a little more riled up than others, and other things I'm like, okay, well, that's not that big a deal. But ultimately, as we've talked about before, we're a great community. We've supported each other. And I think that if we want to continue to be able to do this in the way we've done it, we need to make our voices heard. What's the prescription for that? I don't exactly know, except to keep paying attention.
Well, here at the moment, the only thing we can do, since this has been published, is to be able to get a hold of Vic Moss and Kenji Sugihara and let them know, hey, I read this. This is what the regulation says, and this ain't right. And let them know, because they're the only ones that are going to have a chance at even bending the FAA's ear at all at this point.
And you said they're already talking, right? There's conversations going on, yeah.
And the one thing about it is that they are all we have as far as representation is concerned at this point. They're not ideal, especially for FPV, but at least they got an idea of what it is we're dealing with on our side.
Yeah.
So, And that's about the only thing we can do. Contact your congressman about it and say, hey, these regulations, there's issues with it, and we need it fixed. And the more people that contact their congressmen, and the more congressmen that get letters and they go, okay, this is an issue, and they contact the FAA or the appropriate people that they got to contact with it. It's a snowball thing, but it is a snowball. The more you push it and the more you roll it, the bigger it gets.
There's certainly a lot of people that love flying, and
Yes.
I think even to the point where I know for me it's if I've got free time, it's what I want to go do, and I've met some of my favorite people while doing that. It seems to attract a really good diverse group of us. So
surprisingly, backcountry flyers, pilots are the same way.
Yeah.
You get into backcountry flying or building your own aircraft for that, and it is a completely separate subclass of pilots and people and type of people versus
like airline pilots.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. It's just as crazy.
I have an uncle and a cousin who both fly, or they used to fly for Continental, and I guess it's United now, but very similar personalities, like take charge kind of guys. But you don't want a pilot who's timid. You want a pilot who's just like a doctor. If there's a little arrogance there, good. He's got confidence.
With a pilot, there's an old adage that says there's no old, bold pilots. But there's a big difference between being a bold pilot and being one that knows what they're doing and is confident about it.
Yeah.
There's a real fine line for that.
Yep. Yeah. You want the one that knows what they're doing, just like a surgeon.
Well, yeah, you want the one that can put a foot on both sides of that line and know when not to cross it. Yeah. So that's kind of where it's at.
Well, again, Doc, thank you for hopping in tonight. And thank you everyone who migrated from the wire crash to this. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna work to get that sorted before I do this next week. I am gonna have Cornell Herg on again. If you remember Cornell, he's the marketing manager for Emacs. He's going to be on next week, and he's really entertaining, and he's going to talk. I mean, I'm curious what his take on all this is. If they're going, oh, you know what? Because that's how they make their money is on these kits and on these sub 250 quads and on even bigger ones. But anyway, we could talk about this, guys. Thank you so much. Thanks for the super chats. Thanks for joining. I want to welcome Matt to the flight crew. And like I said, I'm going to be sending out new flight crew shirts to people who don't have them already. And Genesee, always great to see you. Joe Blaylock, always great to see you. Ray
Genesee.
Kelly. And by the way, Ray, again, I'm not sure if you're trying to get people to your meetup or if you're trying to keep it small or whatever, but let me know and I'll try to help you promote it. I'd love to come, man. Florida in March would be awesome. It's like spring break there or something, but
It's been in the teens up here at night where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, if Doc's going, then you'll get even more people. So
we'll have some fun because I always bring something interesting to either fly, break, or crash.
You do. All right, man. Well, thank you again for joining. I'm gonna
Kelly, if you would make sure you put my email in the show notes for anybody.
I will.
If they're not on Instagram. So
I will put your email.
That way they can. Yep.
And your Instagram. I've got to go in and actually add all that because I just spun this up without any notes. But yeah, and remember, you can reach out to Doc if you want to get these documents. That's why they call him Doc. Not really, but all right, guys.
Kind of works though.
Thanks again. Take care, bud. Virtual high five.
Have a good night, guys.